but in the month of December, house prices around New Zealand actually fell by 1%. Now, 1 month does not a new trend make, but it does fit with, I guess, some of the weakness I've been seeing coming through in my surveys of mortgage advisors, real estate agents, property investors, consumers generally. That sort of coalface insight has been telling me for some time now, yeah, the boom is over, and now the data, more official data, will actually start to show that.
Welcome to Tea with Tony 2022. It seems 2022 will be the year of Omicron. What could that mean for the economy? Is the property boom over for New Zealand? And what of interest rates, inflation, and that CCCFA legislation? Despite challenges in all of these areas, Tony's also predicting some growth. Let's get his perspective. Hey Tony, how are you?
Good, thanks, Lenska. Good to be back again. A new year, a whole lot of new challenges out there.
Look, I'm going to start with the big red light and just touching on Omicron. By all accounts, Omicron seems to be, more transmissible and less virulent, but with it undoubtedly comes another round of uncertainty for everybody. So is Omicron just a case of COVID economic response repeat, or do you see potential differences this time round?
Yeah, I think definitely a difference this time around. New Zealand has got the advantage of, we've seen how it's gone overseas. There's about a 4-week lag from when the numbers of infections start shooting up to when they peak. And we've seen this in Australia, United Kingdom, Canada, I had a look at the other day as well, and then things coming down on the other side. So I think although we're all going to be scared fairly shortly about the numbers going up, it is more along the lines of the end game for COVID-19. And we're going to be learning to live with the virus out there. And I guess all up, while it's definitely some short-term interruption to the economy, it doesn't fundamentally change my outlook and commentary on the housing market. The various factors I've been speaking about for a long time as driving prices up, they're not really changed at all. But if anything, you'd have to say during the Omicron wave period, more people not working, a bit of extra inflation out there, extra supply chain disruption here and also overseas, a bit of extra inflation is likely out of this. So it could eventually mean interest rates a little bit higher, possibly earlier than would otherwise be the case. So at a stretch, I would say it might be a small negative for the housing market, but frankly, that's going to be, I think, well lost in the wash amongst all the other factors we're going to talk about, CCCFA, all those other sort of things.
Tony, you've been in the news a lot lately talking about this, and we kind of hinted at it last in December. Is the property boom over?
Well, yes, it is over. I've been talking, I'll have to look at my documents, but maybe 6 or 8 months ago, I started speaking in terms of we have entered the end game for the boom in the property market, whether you're talking about soaring prices since 1992, since after the global financial crisis, or just since the end of the first nationwide lockdown in New Zealand, come late May of 2020. Whatever time period you looked at, some of the factors contributing towards it were coming to an end, such as record low interest rates. We've now got interest rates rising and more to come along. Also, the unusual migration boom in New Zealand from about 2015, including Kiwis, coming back home. Well, I've got a view that that's going to go around the other way this year, whereas a lot of Kiwis go across to, Australia for the higher wages, those sort of things. And yeah, I've talked repeatedly about these things just going back in the other direction. None of them adding up to any sort of a crash, any big fall in house prices or anything like that. But it's more the absence of the very, very strong gains that we've seen over a 3-decade period. And it was interesting to note just recently, we saw the REINZ release their data for the month of December. It's pretty much the most up-to-date data you can get on the turnover in the housing market and on the prices. Now, a lot of people in the media, of course, they focused on the annual increase. December on a year earlier was up 23%. I saw some data from Trade Me asking prices in December, I think it was, up about 25 or 26% from a year earlier. But in the month of December, house prices around New Zealand actually fell by 1%. Now, 1 month does not a new trend make, but it does fit with, I guess, some of the weakness I've been seeing coming through in my surveys of mortgage advisors, real estate agents, property investors, consumers generally, that sort of coalface insight has been telling me for some time now, yeah, the boom is over, and now the data, more official data, will actually start to show that.
Inflation. I said this to you, I think 8 months ago, the dirty word that is inflation, and it was almost a pipe dream when we started talking about it. When and how can it realistically be brought back in within that, perceived 2 to 3% safe zone?
Yeah, well, this is the big uncertainty here and overseas. If we go back 3 to 6 months, then the central bankers here overseas were quite confident that it would be transitory, just temporary, because a large part of the inflation was being driven by factories being closed, ships not where they should be, shipping containers, supply chain problems which will get sorted out. But the longer it's gone on, the more prices have gone up for businesses in general. They've been passing their higher costs into their selling prices. And of course, then you start to get a wages response as well. So the simple length of time the transitory period has gone on has given momentum to inflation. And what I've learned from being in this business back since the late 1980s is that every single sort of inflationary period is pure guesswork as to how high inflation goes, how quickly it comes down on the other side, how high interest rates need to go, how quickly, up high for how long to get it under control. The level of uncertainty is always high for an inflationary cycle. And when you throw in the uncertainty related to COVID-19, for instance, in there, then there's an extra dimension as well. So the comment I've been making to people for quite some time has been, don't look at a particular set of interest rate forecasts and say, well, if they were brave enough to say that, it must be going to be true. Therefore, I will only fix for blah, or I will stay floating or something. No, I was strongly advocated, of course, to fix 5 years at 2.99 or 3.15%, and not many people did. And now the rates are about 2% higher. I think people need to allow for the uncertainty, maybe with a little bit of mixing and matching, a bit of 2-year, a bit of 3-year, maybe even some 1-year fixed interest rate. Because in all honesty, reply to your question there, Lenska, we do not know how long inflation will remain high. And I've just started writing 1 or 2 articles basically saying, will our central bank have to create a recession to get inflation back under control? I don't think so, but they did in 2008. We were in recession in 2008 as they were fighting inflation before the global finance crisis came along. So I'd only give that a low probability at this stage, but couldn't rule it out completely.
We've got some reasonably underreported advancing challenges internationally around Russia, the Ukraine, fuel prices, and then on top of that, the share market seems to be getting a bit of the international market seems to be getting a hammering. Bitcoin's lost its pants. Talk to us about that and how it can affect us in little old New Zealand.
Yeah, okay. I mean, if the markets weaken overseas, just about whatever market you're talking about, there will be some flow through into New Zealand because we invest, we borrow internationally, so there'll be an impact. And of course, when you get the prices of things falling, people go, oh, maybe I'm getting poorer. I think they're getting poorer. They'll think I'm getting poorer. We're all going to cut back on our spending. So it will have a little bit of a depressing impact on world growth. And of course, it will reduce the need for interest rates to go up, unless oil prices soar, in which case, it's sort of a quite a bad 1970s sort of a situation. Now, I've already had one person call me up and say, Tony, how's it going? We haven't spoken for a few years there. What do you reckon about Ukraine and what should I do with my shares? Well, I'm not an advisor, is what I pointed out straight away. But I said, think back to how you were feeling, your emotions and what you did in the March quarter of 2020. 2020, we learn about COVID-19. We learn it's a global pandemic. What happened to all of us? I'm nervous. I'm scared about what's going to happen. Share prices have started to fall. I'd better sell before they fall any further. When you're thinking about what share markets are doing and what to do at the moment, try to remember how you felt when you learned about COVID, what you or some of your friends did with your portfolios back at the time, and just go, yeah, hang on, these markets do recover. I am in this for the long run. Let's maybe just stand back and see how things go. Keeping in mind, nobody apart from Mr. Putin, President Putin, knows what's going to happen in Ukraine in the very near future.
I just want to ask, going back to fuel prices, just bringing that back, because there's a lot of chatter that fuel's going to hit over $3, and which wouldn't be unlikely. And this is a country that is very dependent, particularly in the farming sector, on fuel. What are the economic impacts of significant and sustained fuel increases, given that it's very well taxed in this country as well, and we don't see that abating anytime soon?
Fuel prices are rising strongly, not just because of maybe some uncertainty surrounding the Middle East, or maybe there's a link there with Ukraine. I'm not quite so sure about that one. But generally, there's an anticipation of reasonable growth in the world economy over the rest of this year and next year, oil demand going up, but fresh new oil supply coming forward. There's not been much of that over the past 1, 2, 3 years. So people are just looking forward at the demand supply balance shifting a little bit. And so, generally it's pushing prices up there. Now, New Zealand is a net importer of energy, and so this represents a reduction in our cost of living, which of course is really what the inflation measure is. If inflation is 6%, broadly that means your cost of living in the past year has gone up by 6%. If your wages have not gone up by 6%, you are getting poorer in terms of the purchasing power of your money. And so already people are going to be thinking about, how can I cut back on some of my spending because I can't save as much as I would like towards a mortgage, paying it off, etc. People are already looking for savings out there. They shift to buying the in-house branded goods in the supermarket rather than the external branded stuff, etc. Maybe people eat out just a little bit less. It changes consumer behavior out there. And if on top of that you get petrol prices going up even further, it definitely has an impact on generally the sort of stuff that people will be spending money on. And I guess of relevance here will be, at some point this year, we're going to see the curve, which had been strongly of growth for furniture sales, electric bikes, kayaks, all the stuff we binged on once we
Spa pools, remember?
Spa pools, my personal favourite. Once we came out of lockdown, these things were going to fall away. Well, given the cost of living going up, then there's extra downside potential for anyone involved, retailers, manufacturers, distributors of those products out there, because we will look to pull back on our spending because of a high rate of inflation. And if that comes from high petrol prices, it's really in our face every week or fortnight as we're topping up the tank.
And look, I've said this before, but this is where an organisation like NZHL comes into play a lot. We see a lot of clients who often are on very good incomes, who are just not managing their money or utilising things as they ideally would like. And so we will sit down with them as part of their refinancing and work through a plan around that. And often it can shave years and years and years off their mortgage, and it's very simple things, and as simple as having a plan and the support in place to do that. Our lending lead and our previous lending lead at NZHL, him and his wife, really successful young couple, really interesting. They have 0 spending days. So like they're building a house and they're working really hard, and they have self-imposed 0 spending days, and they bring their lunches and they do this, and they have they make it quite fun. So it's because they're inherently interested in managing money, it's become quite fun for them. But there's things you can do as a couple, and so there's little things and little tips and tricks that our consultants are very aware of. Some of the things that, some of the ideas, they're quite fun. Anyway, look, you referred to CCCFA. Let me try and get this right. Consumer Credits Contracts Finance Act. I think I got that around the wrong way, but it's actually become part of the everyday vernacular at the moment because there's been so much media coverage. What are your thoughts on the impacts and what the review is going to achieve? Because the government has announced a review of how the banks are interpreting legislation.
Yeah, it's a credit crunch. This is the term I started using, I guess, maybe about 3 months or so. And it's not just the CCCFA, Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act. It's the LVR, loan to value ratio lending. Since November 1, banks could do less of that than previously. So that was from the Reserve Bank. At the same time, since maybe middle of last year, banks have started experimenting with DTIs, debt to income ratio restrictions. for their lending as well. Just a bit of unfortunate timing there. But the key element here is the CCCFA, which basically means that if banks are deemed to have undertaken irresponsible lending, they could face fines of up to $200,000 for the senior managers, for the directors of the bank, and they cannot take insurance out against this. Now, obviously, senior people in the bank who determine policies, etc., are going, well, we do not want to be caught by this. We don't want to do bad lending anyway. And so the lending criteria the banks are applying has tightened up very, very considerably. Now, the target of the legislation was basically loan sharks, high interest rate, talking people into this sort of thing. So that was the target. And it
was well-intentioned. It was a well-intentioned piece of legislation designed to protect the vulnerable. That has not quite worked out that way.
The bycatch is huge. They're catching too many dolphins, basically. They're getting the fish, but they're catching too many dolphins and porpoises, etc. So basically, yes, people, especially, let's say, if you're over 50 years of age and you're going to get a mortgage, the bank is going to go, but you may retire when you're 65. So your ability to service a mortgage is not all that great. And even though you've got massive equity in your owner-occupied house and maybe your investment properties, on a debt servicing side, we have to allow for maybe your income isn't going to be that great in 15 years' time. And so they don't give them a mortgage. They look back in people's 3 months of statements and the discretionary spending, which if any of us get a mortgage, we stop. You get your mortgage, the debt is high, so you do alter what you spend.
Especially if you come and see someone like us, like I explained, because you work out a plan and a servicing plan. So it can be that's not taken into account like it probably should be, is it?
That's right. The banks aren't allowing that we change our behaviour when we get a mortgage or an extension, extra debt out there. They assume we're going to keep spending that much at the nightclubs, on the online services, on the domestic, the international travel. They sort of assume that spending continues. But what it means is they're saying, well, OK, if you can cut back on that, prove you can cut back on that spending for 3 months, then we'll be able to give you a mortgage. And so we're in a period at the moment where the country is probably filled with a lot of young people who have cut back on a lot of their spending, and they need to do it for 3 months to prove they can do it, and then they'll get a mortgage down the track. So I think we're in the depths of that credit crunch at the moment, but I do expect some of those buyers will have got their personal spending in order to meet the bank requirements and will re-enter the market maybe in 1, 2, in 3 months' time. The Commerce Minister, David Clark, has asked the Council of Financial Regulators to bring forward a review of the legislation, which was planned for some time anyway. But the way he's couched it is in terms of to see if the banks are applying the legislation correctly. Well, they are applying it correctly. It's the legislation itself, which is the problem, which has put the banks in this position. So I expect eventually the legislation will be changed, but it may not happen for quite some time. And so for a lot of people, they are going to be out of the market. And in a way, for those who are quick on the thinking there, you'll be realizing this is actually partly doing the job of the Reserve Bank, isn't it? It's actually like a big increase in interest rates. It's taking a lot of buyers out of the market. But remember what I said just earlier on, just because the housing market flattens out doesn't mean interest rates stop rising. The overall inflation is the target, and that's a different thing from the housing market. So I'll just take the opportunity to repeat that warning there.
Yeah, look, and what I will say on CCCFA is because of the unique way NZHL works is we probably, and the tools we use, like I explained, to help people plan and monitor and review, we're very well placed to guide people through that process. I think one of the frustrations has been if you're in it, for many existing customers, if they want what used to be a simple top up, there's a full application process involved, and so there does seem red tape for red tape's sake in that respect. But look, we're here to help you and guide you through that. Thanks, Tony. Really nice to see you again, and it's going to be another interesting year and an interesting ride. Look, I will add too, if anyone has any questions that they want us to me to ask Tony next time round, that's absolutely fine. Just pop them in the chat or in the comments below. And as I always say, Tony is an independent economist, and we like it that way. His views are his own and not necessarily those of NZHL, and vice versa. So thanks everyone. Happy New Year, and we'll do it all again next month.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Ta-da.